Israel has continued with its bombardment of the Gaza Strip despite a UN call for an immediate ceasefire. Warplanes carried out dozens of airstrikes today, 2 weeks after the conflict with Hamas fighters first began. Last night, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution demanding an end to the violence, which has claimed over 700 Palestinian lives so far, many of them women and children.
There was no respite for Gaza today, despite a clear call from the United Nations Security Council for Israel to bring an end to the 2-week assault. Last night, the UN finally managed to produce a Security Council resolution which demanded an end to Israel's conflict with Hamas fighters.
For the past 2 weeks, people around the world have observed with grief and horror the escalating violence and suffering in Gaza and southern Israel, and have looked to the United Nations to put an end to the fighting. I'm heartened and relieved at the adoption by the Council today of a resolution to bring an end to this tragic situation.
The resolution demanded an end to hostilities that would eventually lead to the pullout of Israeli forces from Gaza. However, the US abstained from the vote, and without American backing, the resolution is likely to put far less pressure on Israel. Israel has vowed to carry on with its assault, while Hamas denounced the resolution for ignoring the Islamist group.
هذا القرار ليس في صالح شعبنا الفلسطيني، لأنه أولا لا يوقف هذا العدوان، ولم ينص على أن تنسحب القوات المعتدية الصهيونية على شعبنا في غزة، كما أنه لم ينص على رفع هذا الحصار على شعبنا الذي مضى عليه سنوات، كما أنه لم ينص على فتح معبر رفح. لذلك ناهيك على أن هذا القرار ينص على مرابطة قوات دولية على الحدود في قطاع غزة. هذا الأمر مرفوض، إنه احتلال جديد، هذا أمر نرفضه. هذه قوات دولية لا تعمل لصالح.
And on the ground today, the situation remained the same. This morning, Gaza's population woke up to survey the latest damage from deadly overnight attacks, which left at least 5 more people dead. In one missile strike in Beit Lahia, a home belonging to a Palestinian employee of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency was destroyed, killing a mother and her 3 children.
تفاجئوا صاروخ دمر البيت وهم لسه نازلين يعني على الدرج وتفتت كلهم أطفال، كلهم بتجاوز ال4 سنين و5 سنين، والمرأة وبناتها وأولادها كلهم أطفال، فلموا عظامهم ولحمهم من كل المنطقة.
More than 750 Palestinians have been killed in just 2 weeks. Local Hamas officials say children make up a third of the death toll. Israel has repeatedly said that Hamas's firing of rockets into Israel has justified its onslaught. Today, around 30 more were fired, although they did little damage. 10 Israeli soldiers have been killed so far, while 4 civilians have died from rocket fire. The prominent Muslim cleric Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who heads the Union of Islamic Scholars, called on Muslims to stage rallies to show their anger at the violence. There have been daily protests around the world against Israel, and today violence flared in the other Palestinian territory, the West Bank. There were demonstrations in a number of cities and some unrest, with clashes between protesters and Israeli police in Jerusalem. Many observers believe that only US pressure might influence Israel to stop its activities. Last night at the UN, America said it was waiting to see the outcome of separate Egyptian efforts at resolving the crisis. However, the absence of any overt US pressure means that Israel is far more likely to push on with its operations. Israel says it wants to stop rocket attacks and prevent Hamas smuggling weapons into Gaza via Egypt, while Hamas says any ceasefire deal must include an end to Israel's blockade of Gaza.
Well, despite Israel's assurances this week that it is providing a safe corridor for humanitarian aid to get through, the UN says its staff have been targeted by Israeli forces and that it's now being forced to halt its aid operations. The Israeli army has also been criticised by the International Committee of the Red Cross, which says Israel has been stopping ambulances from reaching targeted areas, in some cases for days at a time. Relief agencies and their staff have clearly been shaken by some of the scenes they've witnessed firsthand as they try and support civilians caught in Israel's attacks on Gaza. The discovery yesterday of 4 starving children who'd been sitting clutching onto the corpses of their dead mothers in a house in a part of Gaza City that had been bombed by the Israeli army has horrified aid workers who are normally capable of dealing with scenes of death and destruction.
I think one of the big shock was that these people were very weak. They were children being next to their dead mother. There were no assistance given to these people. There were around 18 wounded, which have not had medical aid, and very, very weak people. The children could hardly stand. There was no water for them, there was no food, and they were with other dead bodies.
The ICRC says Israel broke international humanitarian law by refusing to allow ambulances into the area for 4 days, leaving those children and others like them abandoned and traumatized.
Which was most shocking from our side is the army knew that the civilians were there and they didn't assist them in any way, and they didn't assist us even to evacuate these people.
And it's not just the ICRC which has been fiercely critical of Israel's behaviour. The UN, which has had several of its facilities hit and lost a member of staff yesterday after one of its convoys was attacked by Israeli forces, says it has no choice but to suspend its operations in Gaza because of the risk posed by the Israeli army.
They're suspended until the Israeli army can guarantee the safety and security of our staff, because we have obligations to our staff. Of course, we have obligations to our beneficiaries, but until we have a secure environment in which our staff won't be killed, our facilities won't be hit, we have no choice but to suspend our operations.
In response, the Israeli government and army have maintained their position that civilian deaths as a result of their attacks should be blamed on Hamas.
Even while we are engaged in a major defensive operation against the Hamas, we are still making sure that we're doing everything we can to help the citizens of Gaza, who are essentially being held hostage.
But some human rights organisations within Israel have also criticised the Israeli army, despite overwhelming public support amongst the Jewish population for the invasion. An alliance of 8 organisations have now filed a petition to Israel's Supreme Court, demanding the Israeli army allow proper humanitarian access to Gaza and stop targeting ambulances and medical personnel. While protests around the globe against Israel's ongoing bombing